Welcome to MeDeMAP, Mapping Media for Future Democracies. Join us on a journey across Europe. Meet specialists and researchers from various fields, unravel the democratic functions of media, and discuss its impact on the essence of democracy. MeDeMAP.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to MeDeMAP podcast, Mapping Media for Future Democracies. Thank you for watching this or listening to this. My name is Tatiana. I am the part of Lusófono University from Portugal, Lisbon. Today we have with us Alessandro Nani and Kristiina Raud, members of Tallinn University Baltic Film, Media and Art School and representatives of Estonia in the MeDeMAP project. Alessandro Nani is an associate professor of cross-media at Tallinn University, BFM, to be short. He currently curates the bachelor study program in cross-media and teaches cross-media and transmedia storytelling and research methods. He's been conducting research in the fields of audience and reception studies, media production, cross-media production, and transmedia storytelling. Kristiina Raud is the Junior Research Fellow in Media Studies in Tallinn University, BFM. She has a background in human rights, advocacy, and communication, and her research focuses on the relationships between media and civic participation, as well as intergroup relationships and social justice. Hello, welcome Kristiina and welcome Alessandro, and thank you, Alessandro, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the amazing introduction.
Yeah, I was trying so hard. I'd like to start by asking you, Alessandro, about audiences and the impact of digital transformation. You have been focusing on audience and reception studies during your career. How are audiences adapting to digital transformations of media consumption, and what platforms or forms of media are the most popular?
Right. First of all, thank you for starting from a very hard question.
My pleasure.
Our talk. When we're talking about audiences and media diet, so what people actually engage with, the first thing that we need to be aware of is what audiences are we talking about. My generation, for example, has an approach to media consumption and engagement, which is very different from younger generations, people in their 20s, for example. Every year with my classes, I do an informal survey where I ask students who owns a TV set, the proper box. And 10 years ago, I would have, maybe 40-50% of the class owning a TV set. And nowadays, I get no more of 2-3 students out of a class of 50, 60, 70 students. And those ones that have it, they have it to play games, usually. So they don't subscribe to television channels. Now, there were some studies in the past that they were referring to the fact that, once you establish a family, once you grow up, you will start using TV. Well, I have a strong doubt about that. The culture is completely changing. The way that we relate to media, and when we're talking about news media, even more, is completely changing. When I ask my students, once again, even to journalism students, when I ask them, who has opened a news portal today, it's shocking how little of them actually do it. What they do through social media, right? And there are different channels. There can be TikTok, there can be Instagram, and so on. They access the news, so it's a kind of referral through social media. So this might be a problem because, as we know, social media is regulated through algorithms. It creates bubbles where you only access certain type of content from certain type of people and circles. So this is something that for sure has changed in the last, let's say, 20 years. And again, to go back to your question, which one are the most popular? no, we all know that the internet, for sure. Well, if I look at the Eurobarometers and the datas across generations, then TV is still the most popular. But when we look at younger generation, most definitely is the internet that is the most popular. And which platform, again, depends on even within a particular, let's say, even when we're focusing, on young people, young is a very, broad, it's many years, right? And even with young people, there are different outlets or different platforms that they use. In a few words, I would say that people like me were still holding on Facebook for certain activities, but even Facebook has transformed how and what we do in Facebook. Younger people probably, TikTok is now very popular, and much younger people, if we're talking about kids, then they have their own platforms which they access.
Actually, to add to that, popularity and trust don't always go hand in hand, because just yesterday I saw a news article about the study that's conducted in Estonia regularly, and the most trusted news sources was online news, but without the differentiation of groups. But a lot of news are accessed through social media, so there's this shift, or not the shift, but kind of this difference between popularity and trust.
Yeah, the issue of trust is an actual very interesting point that you're referring to. Through the works here through the research work conducted within MeDeMAP, we have found a number of things that are very interesting. For example, young people tend to trust more social media than traditional media. Why? Because they believe that, traditional media comes from one journalist, comes from a media organization that might have their own agenda, while social media is this free space where everybody can counter-argument something, which is in a way true, but we very well know how vulnerable social media is to being influenced. And the algorithms, once again, the bubble that we live in, you're risking of listening only to one side of the story rather than, and there is no accountability,
Do you think in Estonian context they are trusting more brands, media brands, or personalities?
What do you mean by media brands?
Like Delphi, or their journalists working there, or some influencing people?
It probably also depends on which kind of social group and age groups we're talking about. Because if the young people say that, they probably don't even maybe think so much about ownership, but just the fact that there's one person behind a text, maybe it doesn't even matter what's the media house. Whereas I think from what we've done with interviews and focus groups, people do have either like TV shows, news or investigative journalism shows, or certain news portals, or even maybe journalists that they do trust. Because, for example, we have Postimees, which is considered to be more kind of conservative, and people who only read that because they know that that's where the news or the information comes from that they kind of agree with and they like how it's presented, whereas the more maybe liberal people have other outlets. So, and then the public service is seen, or at least hoped to be, somewhere in the middle, like the neutral one, but obviously there can be like no actual neutrality.
Speaking about different views and different social positions, the next question is to you, Kristiina. Yes, one of your topic of interest is intergroup relationships, social justice. How do media representations in Estonia affect this dynamic in fostering inclusion and reinforcing these divisions?
Here I kind of have like two hats that I can put on. One is like the research that I read and done and will be doing in the future, but the other is my background. I used to work at a human rights advocacy organization, specifically working with LGBT topics, but also being in the network of different social groups and human rights organizations. And as the head of communication at my organization, I was very acutely aware and had like pretty much firsthand experiences of how different social groups often live in different realities based on the information that they get from the media. So if we're talking about a marginalized group, and maybe there's discussions of maybe extending certain legal protections to those groups, then the discussions of that in the media can lead to very strong reactions, very strong polarization, whereas maybe kind of interpersonal contact will bring people closer together, but the media that they consume and the emotions that they get from it kind of, to begin with, already distance these people. So from that specific experience that I've had, and also observing other topics, like when we had the refugee topic was very a sharp discussion in Estonia, then I definitely see the role of media, social media and news media, and the people who use them to their advantage, basically, often political advantage, but not only, how that can also kind of this polarization or at least distance between social groups that hinders this mutual understanding and seeing the similarities instead of differences.
This is the question to both of you. We were talking about consumption, news through social media, and social media like really often goes hand to hand with disinformation, and this disinformation became a global challenge nowadays, and Estonia faces particularly this vulnerability due to this unique political and historical context. And how has disinformation impacted the Estonian society, and what are the ways media organizations are trying to fight disinformation? What do you think?
Well, when we're talking about disinformation, sometimes what we need to understand actually is that in the case, for example, of Estonia, disinformation, the most dangerous type of disinformation is it takes the form of, let's say, incorrect historical narration. This means that the occupiers become the liberators. The winners become the heroes of the story, when actually, in the history perhaps is very different. So in the case of Estonia, what the media is trying to do, the country is trying to do, is to have a coherent narrative that represents the tragic events that Estonia had to go through in the last century. Estonia, this has to be clear, was under the Soviet occupation for 50 years. It was not a deliberate, it was not by choice, it was forced to be part of it. So we are trying to make sure that our citizens have a clear understanding of this. And we are trying to make sure to reinforce the national cohesion and the social cohesion through the media. So first of all, and most importantly, is to have a truthful narrative, and a narrative that is shared by our citizens. Then, of course, we have some, let's say, practical or more technical choices that have been taken here in Estonia. Not many years ago, for example, was established a new channel for the public service broadcasting. There was a channel broadcasting in Russian language, ETV Plus. And that was an important step to kind of unify a nation that until then didn't have an official public service broadcasting in Russia. I want to stress and remind you that in Estonia there is 38% of the population that has Russian origin. After the war of Russia on Ukraine, for example, it was taken a decision here to stop the broadcasting of a number of Russian channels that were spreading disinformation. But you cannot only, the main thing is that technology, in a way, it cannot, in a democracy as we are, and the right of information, the freedom of speech and so on, we cannot put too many limits on it. People anyway will access the information that they want. So for us, what is very important is to have a coherent narrative that tells the history as it was and looks at the future from a very democratic perspective, which is not what perhaps countries that are not looking at democracy as a model are suggesting that the future could be and how we could develop.
Actually, also in our conversations with journalists as well as members of audiences, a lot of nuance comes out. Journalists, for example, they are aware that Estonia is a small country and Estonian is a small language. So the content, whatever is it, news, journalism, even entertainment, content in Estonian language can never compete with the amount of content in Russian, if we're talking about, Russian audiences. So Russian speakers, wherever they are, they will always have more access to information just by the sheer amount of it, just like with English, for example. So that's one limitation on it. So that's why also, in Estonia, there's been more support for Russian language content in news portals, TV channels. But again, it's a matter of resources. And it's also a matter of making the content good enough that people will actually want to switch from this abundance of Russian language content to this specific. But in terms of disinformation, it's obviously not just a matter of, Russia. We have local actors who spread disinformation. There's international actors. It has been a conversation among journalists as well. One of our media houses has a whole separate section that deals with fact check. But there's also, different opinions on how effective that is. But there is kind of developments to counter it more. But every time we talk about it, the conversation comes at resources eventually.
But when you are talking about putting this narrative from winners to occupiers, what kind of formats do journalists use in Estonian media? How are they trying to embed this narrative?
Well, my first thought is there's been a significant, for me, noticeable change in how journalists refer to Russia, the war that's going on in Ukraine, and kind of the job title of the president of Russia. So that has been changed. It's not just one president among many. There's more of, they talk about it as I don't think it's been called a dictator necessarily, but the tendencies that he's displaying have been more explicit in reporting. There's been big emphasis on constantly calling the war this full-scale war, full-scale invasion, not just a conflict, as opposed to maybe other conflicts that are going on in the world. This specific one we're very specific with the wording. So that has been changed, and then that kind of reflects also kind of the historic role that Russia has played in our consciousness and in our history. So it talks about the present while implicitly acknowledging the past, I feel. But the rest of the work is done a lot in education. It's not just the media that's educating people because, education determines what kind of media you agree with and therefore consume. So there's been a lot of talk of education as well recently in the recent years about kind of evening out the narrative.
Is there something being doing with media literacy at schools here?
I think there's more of it recently. I'm not sure about, kind of high schools, middle schools, but I know that there's been more and more kind of programs libraries are doing, are kind of addressing this topic for younger people. Universities and BA level are doing more of it. Hopefully more in schools as well, but I'm not quite aware.
I think that the awareness in general has grown among young people. Now young people are questioning much more than my generation was questioning. If I would have read before something in the media or in a book, it was, assumed that was correct. Now young generation are questioning a lot. And this is the result of education, for sure. This is the results of programs. This is the results of educators, teachers, professors, the media, telling to our people, check things, make sure, try to check, make sure to get things from different perspectives to make your own mind about events, about news and so on.
There was an interesting interview with a group of young people, maybe middle school and high school aged, maybe some of you a bit older as well, maybe last year, where they gathered a group of these young people, and one of them said a really kind of, to me, insightful thing. They said that we are constantly bombarded with information and we don't really make the decision to consume this information, but we can tell whether it's, bullshit or not. Whereas older generations, younger people admit that older generations make the conscious choice to consume certain media at certain times for certain purposes, but they feel that older generations don't have as good of a filter to detect when something is kind of manipulated or not. So they admit the pros and cons of both, and that was very insightful to me from an 18-year-old or something.
That's interesting. And these aspects, while we were talking, related to media freedom and independence of the media outlets, which are shaped by legal framework of the country, and all the countries were conducting their work in their framework of work package dedicated to legal assessment. You had interviews for evaluating this environment, and you had also done like a literature review for this. How would you describe what's happening in the Estonian legal framework media-wise?
All right. So first of all, let's remark that Estonia ranks extremely high in the freedom of speech index. It's one of the top countries in the world. And we are very proud of that because we believe that freedom of speech to be one of the basic rights of the media, independency as well, and so on. So we are very happy about that. Having said this, we don't have until now a media law in Estonia, a specific media law, which, but we have a lots of code of conducts, which
self-regulatory.
Yes. Which all the media houses are following, and they are respecting that. So we don't have problems in that respect. Through the interviews that we were doing, we discovered that to find a balance between the need of regulating something and freedom is sometimes hard. I'll give an example: the GDPR in Europe. Thanks to that, we had witnessed a few cases where the media was sued in court, despite the fact one particular media house actually was sued twice in court, despite the fact that they were not releasing the name of the people, that they were trying to be, keeping things anonymous and just, bringing up certain issues. People felt that was going against their right to privacy and using the GDPR law and regulation, then they, took the media houses in court. So now with the Media Act that we are discussing at the moment, European, there are discussions as well where to find a balance, between regulating something and as well maintaining the level of freedom that until now we have been happily and successfully maintaining in Estonia. So we are in a phase of change at the moment. If you will ask me this question maybe in a few years, then the situation will be different. For us, it's important that the media maintains its freedom, its right to inform and to investigate at the same time. And so far, we've been very good, but let's see how it will develop later on.
But interestingly, it's maybe not so much an issue of the legal framework of the media, it's the legal context that the media exists in. So the increase of slap cases against journalists and media houses, journalists have brought out this issue of kind of like state and local institutions making a lot of documents that should be public, not public, which is an increasing trend in Estonia. So in itself, media works pretty well, but it's the things that they have to deal with from outside of that framework that are causing increasingly more issues for them.
Is here a strong union? Is here a union?
A union of what? Of journalists, you mean? We have a journalist association, but once again, the figure of journalist in Estonia is not a, let's say, legally recognized figure, meaning that anyone in Estonia can do journalistic activities. We do have a union of journalists which release the press card and so on. But again, it's self-regulatory. So theoretically, for example, if we're talking about the access to press conference by the government, anyone can go there.
So we can go.
Yes, absolutely. However, no, because there are limited seats. If there is something very important, the priority will be given to those that are recognized through the years and through having the press card. They will be given a sort of priority to these journalists. But theoretically, if you request the access to a press conference by the government, anyone could access it. Again, to what Kristiina was saying about the legal framework that journalists have to deal with, anyone could, except if they're not secret, but anyone could ask for court documents. Perhaps journalists are given, the requests given by journalists are processed a little bit faster, but not because the law requires that, but simply because, we are in a professional settings and, they understand that, maybe a journalist needs some information a little bit quicker than any other citizen that might want to have the access to this information. So what I'm trying to say is that the system is not at the moment regulated so much, but we are going in the direction where there will be more regulations and then common sense and best practices, let's say, apply or have applied until now.
So we are like in this digital age impacting audience and civic participation. How do you see how media and digital platforms influencing civic participation in Estonia, and what role do they play in shaping public engagement in democratic processes?
Right. Again, I can talk as a researcher and I can talk as a former activist. Actually, one of the studies that I'm doing is exactly about how certain social media profiles encourage people to, first of all, kind of find a sense of agency in themselves, that they can actually do something. They don't have to wait for elections every so many years, and then maybe somebody up on the hill will do something. So I'm specifically researching this profile that's discussing issues of urban environment. And why I'm interested in it, because it affected my own civic participation. So through following that account, I actually discovered knowledge and skills and the inspiration to do something for my urban environment. It started with planting a flower in front of my building, to lobbying my building association to put up bike parking, to deal more with greenery. And I see other people sharing their stories. So just from one person, it's just one person running the account, sharing this knowledge and skills and education about best practices and about kind of commenting on political discourse, criticizing the people in power who could be doing more but aren't. A lot of people, for Estonia, their following is quite big. A lot of people are actually taking things into their own hands and just improving their own environment. And I think that's a pretty great example of how, if you find a sense of agency and you combine it with skills and knowledge that somebody provides you via social media, it can change a lot of people's own perspectives, and also kind of this social movement even it can become. So that's definitely one example. From my previous professional experiences, I definitely saw how kind of the more young people got involved on a specific issue, so let's say LGBT issues that I was working with, the more this new generation came along, the more they were using social media to find each other, to interact, to offer support, and from there to also maybe organize demonstrations, sign petitions. In Estonian history, we have this option of signing online petitions that, after gaining a certain number of signatures, can go to the parliament, and then the parliament can decide how and when and whether they will discuss it. The two largest petitions in terms of signatures, over 30,000, were one against expansion of the rights of same-sex couples, and the one for same-sex marriage. So, and they were huge for Estonia. That was huge. The number was, humongous. So, through those digital means, Estonia is a very digital country. We have e-voting, which also, enables participation. We have those online petitions that are not just, screaming into the void of the internet, but actually have a structure to go to parliament. Social media groups, demonstrations organized there. So there's definitely it supports a lot of people finding an outlet for them, whether it stays on the web, whether it actually, piles out into the streets. But in my experience working in advocacy, was like the more young people get engaged, the more the impact of any kind of digital media increases.
Yeah, Estonia is e-Estonia is by definition, a digital country. I'm not Estonian myself, and the level of digitalization in Estonia still, doesn't surprise me anymore now. I've been living here for many years, but when I talk to my relatives back in my country, in Italy, the level of the digitalization of our living, is beyond imagination. Kristiina has mentioned e-voting. Now, in Estonia you can vote online. And interesting enough, now young people, very young people, they go and vote at the station, not online. Why? Because it has become exotic to vote traditionally rather than voting online, right? And this says a lot about the level. And many initiatives have started, many positive initiatives. There is an initiative called Let's Do It that has started a cleanup day, which is something that has taken all around the world now, is engaging millions of people around the world, and it started here in Estonia. And the idea was like, let's go in our parks and forests and clean them when they started. And Estonia is a very clean country, actually. So yes, yes, the digital is an extension, let's say, of the non-digital here, to a point that they're very entangled, and it would be unthinkable to think of Estonia that is not connected through digital platform and opportunities, I would say. And of course, to be critical, I was mentioning before the digital bubble, the algorithms that, we see certain, but we are aware of this, and people are more and more acting to counter the risk of living in a bubble. I mean, young people are doing it constantly, for example, by creating new accounts because they want to start fresh. Right, in certain platforms, and
or following somebody by these guys.
Princes. But I think the digital participation actually goes well with kind of the stereotypical Estonian character, because we are not a country of demonstrating in the streets like some other countries. Like when I was in Spain, there was a demonstration out my window, every single day about something. Here, this kind of coming out into the streets and physically being visible, we don't have a tradition of that, obviously for historical reasons, but also in like the 30 years of kind of regained independence, it's maybe there's a bigger demand by young people because they see it more in the world, but it's not part of our kind of, nationally social self-expression. So to have those digital connecting options as well, I think serves us quite well, because on one hand, it can stay there and you still feel you've done something, or it can be a place to kind of find other people and gain support and exchange ideas, and then maybe try to do something, physically present.
So let's shift our focus to your experience as researchers. We'd like to hear about the journey you've had in your respective fields and the challenges that you faced along the way, and how you have navigated all these complexities of research work, of conducting the research with other people. So my first question would be, how does your positionality and research background as a researcher influence your approach to the study, especially topics of media and democracy?
Right. As a researcher, I grew up my interest in audiences. And audiences and the reception of messages, and how citizens, not to use the word audiences, how citizens actually receive whatever message that they encounter or that they are, faced with. And my experience has taught me that what is very interesting actually is to let people talk and confront each other. So within MeDeMAP, I think that personally, at least, the most interesting part are, for example, the focus groups, citizens focus groups, more than interviews even, because they can confront each other. They sometimes can even argue with each other, but it's fostering the dialogue among citizens that really fascinates me. A different understanding of democracy, a different understanding of what is the role of media organizations. All right. So this is what I think I really enjoyed, and I'm still enjoying because we're still working on it. About MeDeMAP, that was this opportunity, to really get the feel of people. And journalists are people as well. So, when we were talking to journalists, they're not this abstract entity, and it was very beautiful, that as well, to let people talk, that's my take.
Yeah, as I've already mentioned several times, I come into this world from the world of human rights and activism. So I actually came to do my master's in communication to be better at my job, which was head of communication of an organization. And then during the master's, I realized, I think I'm better suited for research than to be to engage in the practice of communication. And that's how I ended up here doing my PhD. And as working as a head of communication, working with, observing media and trying to get your messages across and seeing how different people react to what you have to say, I became very concerned, but also very fascinated by how people exist in completely different realities. It's like we're living right next to each other, but based on the information we have, based on the knowledge we have, based on the meanings we create, how we interpret the information, we can live in completely different realities. And how do you bridge that? And that was kind of my practice turned academic interest. And that's what I'm doing here as well. And in that sense, the MeDeMAP project is a perfect fit because it kind of expands that interest. So I can go from like the general of how do people in a country or even in Europe relate to media and media's role in democracy to, as you mentioned, my interest in intergroup relations. So how do groups with different kind of meaning spheres relate to each other or don't? And then down to the individual level of what creates the sense of I can participate. I am someone who can participate. I am someone who exists in a society that is democratic, that has a role in this. So yeah, it's my personal experience turned research interest turned apparently a good outlet for the project.
As you mentioned, this some tasks of the project, they are highly dependent on involving people to their participation, and we need to record a lot of people to be able to share with us their experiences and to answer our questions. Then sometimes it can be challenging. What are some key challenges you face during while trying to engage audience in the research, particularly in the context of media and democracy? And how did you tackle this? What strategies do you find effective?
When you're talking to, let's say, general citizens, the main challenge that I have faced is the issue that people perhaps sometimes feel like, well, I'm not an expert on this subject. I might have my own idea of what the media should be and what democracy is, but I'm not an expert. And sometimes it's difficult at the beginning to go deeper into their understanding of democracy, right? Usually the first two answers that we get is like, oh, the right to vote, right? But then when the ball starts rolling, then there are different things. Democracy doesn't necessarily mean agreeing on what the majority is saying. Democracy can even mean, to be in disagreement, right? To have a different opinion to the, let's say, hegemonic understanding of certain issues. So when we conducting our research is breaking this, especially with those that they are not professional within the field of, politics, media, and so on. So the first thing is to break this, to make people feel comfortable enough to understand that there is not necessarily the right answer. There are different shades to tackling one aspect and to discuss one topic. Not being Estonian myself, Estonians are quite, at the beginning at least, I would say that they're quite reserved. And it takes a little bit to share their own feelings, but give them 10 minutes and then they open up and they can be quite outspoken.
Yeah, and interesting.
Yes, absolutely.
I think that relates also to the kind of the challenge or something to be aware of is often as researchers, we think we worded the perfect question, but it's not the wording that a regular person would ever think of. So kind of speaking in the language of the person you're talking to, which can be different. You speak in one way with journalists, you speak another way with their grandmas. It can be very different. But several times I've caught myself like, okay, does a regular person actually think of things this way, or should I rephrase it? And being aware of kind of meeting people where they are. One of the things that I was also kind of aware of, maybe not worried about, but aware of is, we've been interviewing for this project very different people with very different worldviews, very different political views. I have tattoos in very visible places. I have short hair, which can be like queer coded for people. I used to have a nose ring. So I used to be very aware of like, I don't want to be perceived as a person that maybe certain types of people don't feel safe enough around to express their views. So kind of neutralizing yourself as much as possible, especially if you want like honest answers on sensitive topics, because political views can be very sensitive. Luckily, we didn't get any fights in our focus groups, but it's always the risk of putting people with different views in a focus group, for example. They kind of avoided, all of our participants managed to avoid explicitly saying what their views are, at least like on the spectrum of left-right. But I don't want to be somebody that makes them censor themselves for whatever reasons. For me, it was my appearance. So being aware of that as well, I think, is important.
Yeah, as this MeDeMAP is in MeDeMAP, many countries are involved with the European Union, and this is about collaboration among all us as the countries, and they will be looking at the comparison and the results. What do you think? What are the benefits and the challenges of this kind of collaborating of research teams with different countries, with different dynamics, different traditions? How does this international perspective enrich or maybe could influence of missing something?
Yeah, I'll start with less experience and you have more experience. So as a junior research fellow, I don't have decades of experience, and also I don't have decades of networks. So starting out my academic career, it's pretty awesome to basically have this international network of top tier researchers kind of handed to me on a plate here, learn from these people, network with these people, talk to these people, share with them. So it's been, to me personally, it's been very much a gift because, as a first year PhD, you usually don't get 10 countries worth of networks immediately. So that's definitely been a benefit for me. Not so challenging, but for me personally, but maybe just something to be aware of is we have like 10 countries in the project, different contexts, people with different levels of experience. And as somebody who's like kind of starting their career, more like learning than assuming, especially coming from a different professional background. I see a lot of similarities, especially in terms of like the project writing processes and all that. NGOs also have to do that. But more kind of learning and finding your base before jumping in and assuming things. So more of a learning experience than a challenging experience.
Getting from interviewer position to also the Portuguese team member, I 100% relate to this, and your take about all the countries and all the top tier scholars being around you. When I personally feel like super early, that was my first ever project. This is kind of like their great entrance point.
Yeah, absolutely. And feeling great in it, not feeling like, I don't belong here. I'm too new or something. No, actually, I belong here. I don't know everything, but I'm in the right place.
Yeah, that's true.
The beauty of the academia and researchers is that we never stop learning. So it doesn't matter how seasoned you are as a researcher, as an academic, we always question ourselves. So being among incredibly recognized scholars is an honor, and you see that we all learning all the time. It doesn't matter if you are a young research fellow or a very seasoned professor. This is the beauty of our profession. It's a constant learning, constant putting ourselves on the line and questioning as well our understanding of things. can add as well that in terms of benefits in being in an international research project, yes, it's the mutual learning, understanding even as well the differences between countries. Let's talk, for example, about accessibility. A small country like Estonia, for us, it's very easy to have access to pretty much any person.
Somebody knows somebody.
Exactly. I mean, I remember this summer, I can tell you an anecdote. We were conducting many interviews, focus groups. We had different working packages. And then suddenly I realized that there was a deadline with 3 interviews that I kind of didn't notice. And I received an email asking for these interviews, and I was like, gosh, I haven't done them, And I didn't know what to do. So I called a colleague of mine and I said, okay, look, I need some very important people to interview. And he was asking me, when do you have to interview them? Well, actually,
Yesterday,
And so we pick up the phone, started talking the heads of media organizations in Estonia. And I got the interviews within 2 days. And one of the people that I interviewed said to me, well, actually, I'm on vacation, but I suppose I can spare 1 hour of my time to answer to your questions. And, this is the beauty of a small country like Estonia, where really, it's easy to access people. And realizing that in other countries it's not so easy. We heard from our partners that, they had some problems, if I'm not mistaken, even no, it wasn't Portugal and other countries. They had some problems to have interviews from journalists, And so you're learning, how to conduct research, international research that might have different challenges. In our country, for example, let's call it challenge, but I wouldn't even call it as a challenge, but, we could say so, is, for example, when we look at the criteria, right, for interviews, that people should not know each other and so on. Well, in Estonia, that might be challenging because we all know, each other. And we had a focus group, and we took people that had no connection in our criteria to create our sample of participants to the focus group. They were supposed not to have any connection. And then 2 participants entered the room and they were like, oh, how are you? And they knew each other, simply because they were neighbors, or maybe colleagues, or
even relatives, maybe.
We had 2 relatives in one of our.
They didn't share the plans to go.
No, they didn't. They just met. They just met in the room.
Yeah.
So
it's a meeting point.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, before doing this research, Kristiina was asking me, what do we do in these cases? And I'm like, these are unavoidable. We just...
And this focus group was in Tallinn, which is the biggest city of Estonia, and not even all people were from Tallinn, and still, so the likelihood is it can happen.
Yes. And this is pretty normal in a country that has 1.3 million people, So, yeah, it's to see how others are doing things, how we're doing things. We are mutually learning, and of course comparing as well our research and our findings is very interesting and important, I would say, in a European context, because we want Europe to be a strong democracy. We want the media to be free and work well. And this is what, sometimes researchers, when I grew up as a researcher, I was told and retold, and then the researcher has to be, detached, independent, and not have his own view on things. That is true, but when we're talking about democracy, I've got a very strong view on democracy, and I do want to live in a democracy. So, in a way, Kristiina has been an activist all her previous life. Now she has entered into the academic world on another hat. But with certain issues, we are unavoidably, activists as well, And if you're saying, are you an activist for democracy and for a democratic society? Yes, absolutely, I am.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. Thank you very much, Kristiina. I've definitely learned a lot, and I hope that our viewers and listeners also learned a lot following this conversation. My name was and is Tatiana Chervikova, and if you would like to learn more about MeDeMAP project, you may follow the website of the project and find out everything we are doing right there. Thank you.